Hi, I'm Dr. Billy Retzlaff, and welcome back to ABA-ish. This video is going to touch on why it's so important to consider the ratio of positive to negative statements that we make when interacting with a child, a student, somebody in our care, whoever that person is that you're really trying to support positive and appropriate behavior in. You need to be thinking about what does your ratio look like. Now, before we get started, if you could do me a huge favor, and if you're liking these videos and want to see more of the content, please hit the subscribe button so that I can keep getting supported and make more content for you all. All right, so let's jump right into it. What we know over and over and over again from research studies is that when there are significantly more positive statements that are made compared to negative or corrective statements, the students tend to be more on task compared to when that ratio is smaller. The same is true for children engaging in more appropriate play and higher levels of appropriate behavior in home. They've actually shown this in workplaces and employees behaving in more ideal ways. When we have positive statements happening more often compared to negative or corrective statements, we tend to see more appropriate behavior across a wide variety of settings. To understand why, I really like to use the balloon analogy. So I'm going to use the term student just to describe an individual, but again, it could be a child that is your own child, it could be a child that you are caring for, whoever it is. I'm just going to use that term student to be kind of general. So I want you to think of it like this. Every student that we have is holding a bouquet of flowers. And our job is to try to help students soar or fly, right? We want to lift them up as high as possible with this little balloon bouquet that we have going. So, when we make positive statements, when we provide praise or acknowledgement in a genuine way, what we're doing is we're adding balloons to the student's bouquet. We're making it bigger, we're putting more balloons in there. So, they're going to fly higher, right? There's more balloons, there's more lifting them up. But when we have a behavior happen that requires us to make, or we make for a different reason, a corrective or a negative statement, what we do is pop a balloon. So if we want to help someone fly, then we have a few different options, right? We can give them as many balloons as possible. So this means that we're finding the positives. We're sharing genuine praise and recognition with them whenever we can. And if someone is struggling to supply, so one of our students is struggling to be on task or successful, our own kid is struggling to engage in appropriate behavior at home or at daycare, we should make that extra effort to give them some more balloons. Now, again, our praise has to be genuine and related to specific behavior. So we can't just make it up, right? We have to be working hard as the caregiver to look for those things that we can provide reinforcement and praise for. It could be simple things like sitting where they've been asked to sit, waiting patiently. Maybe it's just playing by themselves or playing a game appropriately. Maybe it's a smile that they gave that made somebody feel nice. You can look for all sorts of ways that students and kids are doing things that we can give them balloons for, that we can praise them for in a genuine and true way. The other option is that we can make sure that we pop as few balloons as possible. So you notice I didn't say we're going to not pop any balloons. It's really, really important that when we see inappropriate behavior, we are efficient in how we correct that behavior. So, when possible, when we're correcting inappropriate behavior, we always want to actually reference what the appropriate behavior would be. So, an example of this would be telling a student that you want them to walk as opposed to yelling out, hey, don't run or stop running, right? But either way, that is still a corrective statement. It is still a negative statement in a way. And so it is going to pop a balloon. And that's okay. We just want to pop as few as possible. So we want to make sure that we're using those corrective statements wisely and only when we need to. Sometimes people make a lot of negative statements about things that a student is doing or a kid is doing. They might heavily focus on, no, don't do it that way, do it this way, and kind of directing that as the adult. And what they end up doing is popping a lot of the students' balloons. So the question often gets asked, well, what's the right ratio? How many positive statements can I make for every one time that I make a corrective or a negative statement? And the honest answer is that there's really no limit, right? We want as many positive, we want that ratio to be as big as possible as long as we're still correcting misbehavior when it occurs. So a lot of times you'll hear 4 to 1. That was something that was looked at a lot, where it was 4 positive statements for every 1 corrective statement. Recent research, I've actually seen a lot of it saying 5 to 1, but I've also seen some research suggesting you might get improvements even if you can get to a 1 to 1 if previously you were making a lot more negative or corrective statements than positive. So the answer is you want the ratio to be as big as possible. Some days are going to be harder to do this than others. Sometimes you might realize, like, hey, I really need to focus on finding those positives. I'm not making a lot of positive statements. Whereas other times you might realize, man, I need to be conscientious of how many corrective or negative statements I'm getting. I'm getting a little nitpicky and, providing a lot of statements towards negative behaviors. I need to tone that back. And sometimes it might be a little bit of each. I need to amp up my positives a little bit, but I also need to be careful and make sure I kind of cut down on my negatives. So there is no perfect ratio, but in general, the more positives that you can give compared to corrective or negative statements, the better. Try to make that bouquet as big as possible so that every student and child that you're interacting with can fly. If this was helpful, please share and subscribe. This little brief explanation of why the positive to negative statement ratio is so important, and continue to check back my channel for more videos. Thanks.